Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another Professor Readiness Check. And before we get started, just a quick reminder of why I started this series, and it's because every semester I recognize students struggling with not just the calculus, and sometimes not even the calculus, but foundational skills that are necessary for success in calculus. And so one of those skills is inside this week's Professor Readiness Check. So let's take a look. So yesterday I posted this equation and I asked if you could solve it. And I gave a little bit of a hint. So I'm going to just extend the hint a little bit. And the hint is, can you find a quadratic hiding inside this equation? So I'm going to give you just a minute if you haven't already had a chance to solve this and see if you can't recognize what's happening here inside this exponential equation. So I'll just have you pause the video and do that, and then we're going to go ahead and solve this together. All right, so let's take a look at the answer to this. What is happening here is there's a quadratic equation actually hiding inside, and recognizing this pattern of a more complicated expression actually being able to be simplified into something much easier by recognizing the pattern. And in this case, if you let u equal e to the x, then remember that u squared, raising a power to a power, you multiply exponents, and so this becomes 2x. And so this is actually u squared minus 6u minus 7 equals 0. And now we have a quadratic that we're going to factor. So it becomes u minus 7 times u plus 1 is equal to 0. Now, we could solve for u by setting these each equal to 0. And so u would be 7 and u would be negative 1. But remember, that isn't what that's not what we're solving for. U is equal to 7 and u is equal to negative 1. But what we really want to solve for is x, and that x is inside an exponent. And so we need to get the x out of the exponent and solve for that. And you can either change the exponential form to logarithmic, or you take the natural log of both sides. So you take the natural log of both sides, and the logarithmic property and e, they undo one another. So that's how we get the x all by itself. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and do that over here. But actually, we don't even need to do that over here. There's a couple of things you can notice here. E to the x, first of all, is always positive. So this doesn't make any sense. E to the x can't ever be negative 1. So you can say no solution. Or you can take the natural log of both sides and approach it from another standpoint and say that since the domain of the natural log of x is equal to y, if that was a function set up like that, then the domain of that has to be greater than 0. And this is not greater than 0. Negative 1 is not greater than 0. So again, we would get to no solution. So the only solution that we have here is x equals the natural log of 7. So if you were able to do that, great job. This by far is probably one of the more complicated examples I've put before you in our series. And so good job if you got it. If you struggled a little bit, you're not alone. A lot of our calculus students would struggle as well. So as we continue with this problem, let's take a look at why it matters. So in calculus, it matters because of pattern recognition. Again, I mentioned earlier that a lot of times in calculus, you'll have a more complex type expression, and recognizing the pattern inside of it, in this case, the quadratic that is hiding, which becomes u squared minus 6u minus 7, that u substitution is what shows up in calculus, especially in integral calculus. Now in Calc 1, it can show up as well. So that u substitution is super important. So pattern recognition is a huge part of being successful, really, I think, in any math class, but especially taking a more complex expression and simplifying it inside calculus. So how do you know if this is a skill that you're struggling with before you start calculus? Well, that's why I created the free calculus readiness assessment. And you can find out what skills you or your student are lacking in. And I give you a personalized readiness score, and that way you can discover what skills you need. So you can go ahead and scan the QR code or go to calculusready.com, download the free assessment, and I will score it for you and get back with you with a personalized feedback on the skills that you need to brush up on. So good luck this semester if you're taking Calc 1, and I'll see you next week.